Hello YouTube, hope you're having a great day today. Today I want to talk to you about one of a famous, more recent science fiction author, Douglas Adams. And we're going to be taking a look not at the work that he's most famous for, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, but instead we're going to be taking a look at Dirk Gently's holistic detective agency. Now, one of the things I like to do with this series is often to give you works that you may not be as familiar with, or to unpack various things that have happened in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and in those genres. Give you a chance to see some forgotten classics and some ones that may not be as well known. I doubt anybody reading this channel is not going to be familiar with who Douglas Adams is, even if you've never read anything. And the good thing about this is that this is currently kept kind of current because there was a recent sort of BBC America series that starred Elijah Wood and some other folks. So you may actually be familiar with the book itself. So today what I want to do is kind of take a look at the book itself, kind of unpack it and kind of take a look where it comes from, where it's going to, and such, and then where we're going from there. All right, so let's unpack Douglas Adams a little bit first before we sort of set into the rest of the stage. Douglas Adams, for those of you who may not know, was actually a writer for Doctor Who before he, and he actually was the editor of Doctor Who, the script editor, where he brought in and ran the scripts, which would have made perfect sense when you think about it. He wrote he was a famous science fiction writer, had already gotten his start. He had this great a few scripts that he had turned in to Doctor Who already. He loved the show, so it would have made sense on paper. The problem is that he just was not a good editor. An editor needs to say no. An editor needs to take a look at a script and say, hey, you know what? This is too ambitious for the screen. It's not going to work. We're not going to be able to make it work with our budget. We're not going to be able to make it work with our actors or with our sets. It's just too ambitious, or it doesn't make sense in this context. And so he had these writers with these big ambitious ideas he wasn't able to say no to. So he was not a good editor. He's only the script editor for Doctor Who for a season before he left at the end of it. While he's editor, he actually has there's actually a couple of things that he's involved with that I think are classics that stand out from that season. In fact, my favorite Doctor Who serial of all time comes from that season, which we'll talk about in a little bit. I actually think, by the way, that's kind of what happened with Stephen Moffat on Doctor Who. This is not a Doctor Who thing, but I actually think that's what happened with him too. He was this great writer. But when he took over the show, I think he wasn't able to say no to himself and other people too. I think that as a result, he had these giant plot lines that he thought were going to be really good, but they just didn't work on the silver screen with the characters, the budget, and such. So I don't think that. I think Demon's Run is the best example of that, where there's an episode set in an asteroid where all the people that the Doctor has helped out over the years are going to come back and help him out, kind of repay that debt in this big giant battle. And while that might work well reading it in a book or something like that, where you can bring back characters from other times, you wouldn't have been able to have done that for budget reasons in a modern context. It just didn't make sense. You would not have been able to have done that. But he did it. Somebody needed to tell him no. And so I think the same, and that was definitely what was happening, back with Douglas Adams too. Somebody needed to tell him no. And when he was going a little bit too far. But Douglas Adams, it's a treasure of science fiction in Britain, and such. While he's a script editor, my favorite, actually Doctor Who serial ever of the old school is City of Death. It is my opinion the best example of the Fourth Doctor being the Fourth Doctor. He's awesome. He's given a lot of room to kind of breathe, to be himself. It's with the Time Lady, Romana, who's a great person. I think she's one of the best traveling companions. The two of them together, taking out time, are both very interesting because they're both time lords and such. And so there's a lot of interesting sort of dialogue happening there. It's very, very good. The basic plot line, and I'm going to tell you this because it's going to be important to the book that we're about ready to talk about in a little bit. So I'm building up that context for you. But the basic plot line of City of Death is that it's set in Paris, and there is this ancient sort of spaceship that arrived a long time ago, millions and millions and millions of years ago on Earth. It exploded, and one of them who has survived and has been influencing human history to get us to the point where we can intercede, send him back in time and such, so that he can fix the issue that's going on with the spaceship. Of course, unfortunately, that's going to end up destroying all of us, because that explosion started all of life on Earth, and was that kind of spark that sort of started life on our Earth. So if he gets what he wants and helps his people and goes off on his way, Earth will be destroyed and doomed for that. So he can't do it. The ship has to explode. That's how history was recorded. So the Doctor fights against him. Makes sense. Okay. So that is an important. It's a great serial. It's so much fun. There's so much fun stuff going into it, and some of my favorite characters are in this too, especially this guy who's just constantly punching people, and it's really funny. So it's great. I love it to death. At the end of that serial, there was a second. One that Douglas Adams did that was going to be, it looked like it was going to be great, called Shada. Shada unfortunately was ended early for some issues that they were having with labor and strikes and such. So they had to end that season early, and that was never finished fully. Some of the scenes of it were used in later stuff. You can get them on DVD with some narration and stuff that kind of finishes out the scenes. And it's a pretty good storyline. In it, the major concept is that there's this really, really old Time Lord named Professor Cronotis, who's been a professor at Cambridge for a long time, and his quarters are a early version of the TARDIS and such. And the reason why I'm giving you the context of Douglas Adams and his two major stories that he did during his season as the editor for Doctor Who is because they're both going to be very important parts of what's happening in the storyline for his novel. He definitely borrows from his own stuff for this book. Now, if you have, so let's take a look at the book. You know who Douglas Adams is. In this book, it's very much a sort of tightly wound temporal book where there's a lot of weird things happening. A lot of funny things are happening too. For example, there's this sofa and a staircase, and they can't figure out how to get it out there, and there was no way that they could have gotten it in there. So there are always little funny, like little subplots and stuff that are happening in a very kind of Douglas Adams sort of way. It involves a lot of the same things that are happening. There's this ancient race, their spaceship has exploded, and they thought they were going to be able to fix it based on this electric monk, but the electric monk wasn't correct. He just gave them a false sense of hope in the plan, even though the plan didn't make sense. It was kind of irrational and such. And the Mad Monk is also a character. One of them survived as a ghost and has been possessing people down through the years, kind of in a City of Death and a Shada-esque way. One of the characters is going to be Professor Cronotis, who is again going to be able to fill in the gaps for our two main characters, and they are, one of whom is falsely accused for the death of somebody else, but we find out that he was actually possessed by the ghost and such. Now, the story has a lot of great things happening in it, and so if you're familiar with it from the later stuff like the television show, just like any Douglas Adams work out there, you just can't make it work in a real sort of sense and have it live in cinema. That's just not where he really sort of does a good job. He comes from that era. He writes stuff for that era. He wrote for the radio. He wrote for television series and such. So he understands script and script writing. But these are different works. They're tight. They're taut. It's hard to do it justice on a screen. And a lot of the jokes that are funny on the page aren't as funny on the screen. They don't work as well. And it's also harder to kind of sustain it over the period of an entire series. So I don't think the series is anywhere near as good as the book is. This book is published in the late 80s, so if you're interested in checking it out, it's freely available. I'll give you a link to it in the Amazon comments below. Have you read Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency? There's a sequel to it too, The Long Dark Tea Time of the Soul, which I also have and have read. We may take a look at later on in a future review. Have you read it? What did you think of it? Did you think it was a classic? Are there any specific plots you want to talk about? I try to keep these reviews relatively spoiler-free with just a kind of basic plot element to it. But I'd love to hear about what you thought about it in the comments below. Do you think it's... if there's any specific things in there, a character that stands out? Do you think it's this great classic Adams work, or do you think he borrowed too much from his own stuff from previously? I'd love to hear more about what you thought about it. I think it's a great book and a great read, like anything that Adams ever touched. Really, tends to be just a great book and a great read. And he's just tightly winds everything together in such this perfect sort of thing. And you'll find out that things that seem like they were non sequiturs early on are actually tightly wound together. Like there's this line in the first book of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Oh No Not Again, where the bowl of petunias is falling towards the earth, having been turned from a missile to a bowl of petunias. And you think it's a total non sequitur. It's just a funny little throwaway line, move on. But you actually find out in a later book it's actually not. There's actually a reason why the bowl of petunias fought that thing. And so he'll do that. And he'll have these sort of interwoven sort of narrative frameworks that happen that makes everything funnier and makes you want to go back and reread it. And this is definitely a book that you want to go back and reread it almost immediately upon reading it. It's great. There's a lot of stuff that's going to happen over the course of the book. Is going to want to make you go back and read it. It's a good book. It's a classic. And Douglas Adams, you know who he is. So if you've not read it, if you've never heard of it, then this is Douglas Adams, Dirk Gently's. And he was going to try to make a third book out of it. Unfortunately, he died before that happened. So there's only 2 books in the series, but this is the first of the Dirk Gently series. So let me know what you thought about it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, feel free to hit that subscribe button down there in the corner. There's going to be a lot more reviews to follow. In fact, I'm recording 3 videos this morning. This is the first of those 3, so I will be publishing them up. I've planned for more than 50 when I started this channel. I've already added like another 25 or 30 videos to my outline for this channel. We're going to be trying to bring to you all these great works from, all eras past. So if you enjoyed this, subscribe. You're definitely going to find a whole lot of things out there I think are going to resonate with you. If you watch this video, hey, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day. We all have busy days and lives. So I appreciate it that you spend some time with me. Have a great